At the onset of America's War for Independence, the British assumed the war would be confined to New England. They also thought it would end quickly. The war lasted 8 years. It spread to all 13 American states and west to Illinois, south to Florida, and Quebec to the north. France allied with America and brought her ships to American shores. Spain joined the war as France's ally. The two empires struck the British at Gibraltar on the west end of the Mediterranean. One American captain crossed the Atlantic and brought the war to the shores of Great Britain. For his victory in the Battle of Flamborough Head in the North Sea near Yorkshire, England, he became an international celebrity. He was Captain John Paul Jones, America's first great naval hero. French Admiral Charles Comte d'Estaing and his fleet arrived at the New York harbor in July of 1778. The French Navy would play a vital role in the events surrounding Yorktown later in the war, but in their first 3 American engagements, New York City, Newport, and Savannah, they either lost to the British or withdrew. In the Mediterranean, the Spanish and the French assaulted the British, who were fortressed at Gibraltar, for nearly 4 years, but the British never gave up their position. By contrast, John Paul Jones won victory after victory. More than any other figure, he is credited with being the father of the American Navy. The title, however, was not initially earned in battle. In Scotland in 1747, he was born John Paul. He went to sea at the age of 12, and over the next 2 decades of maritime experience, rose in rank in the British Merchant Marine. In 1773, the 5'5" tall Paul killed a mutineer on his ship in Tobago. He fled to Virginia and assumed the name John Paul Jones in order to hide his identity. From its inception in 1775, the Naval Committee of the Continental Congress relied on Jones as an advisor. Among his most important contributions was the role he played in transforming merchant vessels into warships for service in the American Navy. Jones helped organize the first American naval fleet, commanded by Commodore Essex Hopkins. Finally, Jones authored 2 formative manuals for the Navy. Captain Jones commanded the sloop Providence starting in 1776. He and his crew captured 16 British ships off the coast of Nova Scotia. Over the next 2 years, he captained the Ranger and conducted raids along the coast of England. In 1779, the French bequeathed an old merchant ship to Jones. The vessel was converted into a warship with 42 cannons. Jones christened the ship Bonhomme Richard, or the Good Richard, in honor of Benjamin Franklin, publisher of Poor Richard's Almanac and great friend of France. The French were fond of quoting the almanac sayings like, "Early to bed, early to rise, makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise." On September 23, 1779, as night descended, the Bonhomme Richard clashed with the British 50-gun warship, the Serapis, commanded by Captain Richard Pearson. The British guns devastated Jones's ship. As the 2 ships drew close, Pearson called for surrender, to which Jones famously replied, "I have not yet begun to fight." As they locked, the fighting turned to small arms fire and hand-to-hand combat. 4 hours of ferocious fighting ensued. The Americans drove the British below deck. Fire broke out on both ships, but it was Pearson who surrendered in the end. The next morning, what remained of the Bonhomme Richard sank off the coast of England. Jones sailed the captured Serapis to Texel, a small Dutch island. In the Netherlands, France, and America, the diminutive captain that Thomas Jefferson and others called Little Jones became a celebrity. After the American Revolution, Jones briefly served Empress Catherine the Great as a rear admiral in the Russian Navy. In 1789, Jones moved to Paris, where he died several years later. In April of 1905, 113 years after Jones's death, and at the request of President Theodore Roosevelt, his body was exhumed from its Parisian gravesite. On July 6, Jones's coffin was solemnly processed down the Champs-Élysées, then transported to America on board the USS Brooklyn. On July 23, 1905, the U.S. Navy brought his remains ashore in Maryland. In 1913, America's first great naval hero was laid to final rest in the crypt beneath the chapel at the United States Naval Academy.